Today, we're going to kick off our conversation with some remarks from our Executive Director, Kyle Southern. We'll talk about high level about the state of higher education today in Illinois and help to set the stage for the rest of our conversation. Then I'll provide a quick overview and background of the DERA legislation itself. After that, our data and research associate, Giselle Palacios, will preview some data from PCC's upcoming DERA progress report, which will then be followed by a conversation about DERA implementation with Kathy Almy, CEO of Almy Education, with a final wrap-up Q&A, and then finally some closing remarks from Marcus Brown, who's Deputy Director for Academic Affairs and Student Success at the Illinois Community College Board. Before we get going, I'd also like to ask participants to remain muted during the duration of the webinar, and please note that we'll have the Q&A function open, so please feel free to drop any questions that you have in the chat, and either a member of our team will try to answer those questions in the Q&A as the webinar progresses, or we'll have some time at the end to answer some of those questions, or we'll answer them in a follow-up after the webinar has concluded. And so with that being said, we'll stop sharing screen, and then Kyle will go ahead and turn it over to you to get us started.
Thanks, Sonny, and good morning, everyone. Thank you so much for taking time to join us today for this important conversation. I want to just begin today by acknowledging what's, of course, the obvious on much of our minds, which is the unprecedented challenges that higher education is facing right now in the face of a federal administration that's putting tremendous pressure on institutions and systems to back away from their commitments to equity and to serving our marginalized student populations. We know that that's important context for this conversation because the work of advancing this issue is so critical to our students of color, our first-generation students, low-income students, the students that PCC will continue to fight for, and that we're honored to partner with organizations, institutions, and systems across the state to better serve. We want to make sure that they have the resources, support they need to be successful and achieve their educational goals. We know that this work is long-standing, and for years, leaders in Illinois have worked to advance developmental education reform. Our budget impasse of a decade ago has a strong echo effect that lingers, but we also know that despite that and the current federal challenges, we only get one chance to serve our students, and we can't wait for greener pastures because students can't wait to be better served by our institutions of higher education. By 2031, we know that nearly 3/4 of jobs will require a post-secondary credential or training beyond high school, according to the Georgetown Center on Education and the Workforce. We also know that public higher education remains the biggest driver for economic mobility for students, and it's essential for ensuring a brighter future for our state, our economy, and frankly, for preserving democracy. PCC's work is grounded in evidence, doing what's best for students, and eliminating inequities. Making developmental education work better for students remains a key focus area for our team, and we remain committed to working alongside our institutional partners and meeting this moment. This includes listening to you and advocating for what colleges need to better serve their students. For example, for years, we've called on the state legislature not just to pass bills, but to adequately fund community colleges. Lastly, we know this work doesn't happen alone, and I want to acknowledge our important partners, including Women Employed, who were vital in codifying DERA into law, and crucial legislators who championed this legislation, like Representative Carol Emmons and Senator Kimberly Lightford, as well as House Higher Education Appropriations Chair LaShawn K. Ford and Vice Chair Debbie Myers-Martin, who we know are in attendance with us today. We thank you for your continuing leadership and commitment on this issue. We hope this webinar will help you understand the progress that Illinois has made in developmental education reform, while also shedding light on the next phases of this important work. Thanks so much to our team at PCC for bringing us together and making sure that you can all be here today. Thanks again for your time, and I'll turn things back over to Sonny.
Awesome. Thanks so much, Kyle, for setting the stage for us. And we're going to go ahead and share screen again and get us going. So first, want to recognize that we have a wide range of folks at this webinar, and so want to make sure that we're providing some quick background on DERA to make sure that we're all starting on the same page. So for an overview of the Developmental Education Reform Act, or DERA, this was passed in the 2021 state legislative session. And if we could go to the next slide, please. In response to dismal success rates for students who participated in traditional non-credit developmental education coursework. So, development education was intended for students who needed additional skills before taking college level math and English. But through the data, we saw extremely poor course pass rates, right? And the students that were enrolled in traditional dev ed were subsequently far less likely to accumulate credits, persist, and complete a credential or a degree. Additionally, those students placed in development education were disproportionately students of color and students from low income backgrounds, which exacerbates pre existing equity gaps in post secondary attainment. And so, as a result, the Illinois legislature passed the DERA law in 2021, which had two key components here, right? And so, component number one was related to how institutions are placing students into dev ed in the first place. And so, DERA dictates that institutions must utilize what we call multiple measures placement, where if a student meets standards on any measure, which includes a certain high school GPA threshold, the passage of high school transitional coursework, or receiving transfer credit from another institution, that means that they must be placed into a college level course. Secondly, institutions were mandated to implement and scale developmental education models that maximize the likelihood of a student completing a gateway course in math and English within the first 2 semesters. And so we will dive a little bit more into what that specifically looks like. But what we see overwhelmingly in the data is that the developmental model most predictive of student success is what is known as co-requisite remediation, which is a broad umbrella term where students are still enrolled in credit-bearing coursework while also receiving simultaneous supports. And so we'll take a closer look at this data in the next section of this webinar, and we'll also have a discussion about what co-requisite actually looks like on the ground. So moving into the next slide, we'd like to talk a little bit about timeline. And so for us and DERA, we're now approaching a really important milestone, which is the 5-year mark since the DERA legislation was passed. And so I won't go through the whole history of dev ed reform in Illinois, but we do want to highlight a couple of really important points about PCC and our role in driving successful implementation of the DERA legislation. And so first, strengthening dev ed is core to PCC's mission. And so we work to address systems level challenges to eliminate inequities in post-secondary attainment. And so as a result, we are deeply committed to making sure that dev ed reform works better for institutions and ultimately for students. And so, as you can see in this next slide, as part of that commitment, in 2021, we were able to secure funding to drive stronger implementation of the new law through what we call our IDEA initiative, of which our first cohort was made up of 17 institutions across Illinois. And so, through that initiative, we work closely with these institutions, providing technical assistance alongside Almy Education, while also convening institutions to navigate the initial phase of implementation of the DERA law. And so PCC's goal is to learn from the last 5 years and take those learnings to continue driving successful implementation of DERA moving forward into the next phase of this work. If we go to the next slide, please. Sorry, the next one. Thank you. So pivoting a little bit to talk about compliance with the new DERA law. And so I mentioned that we're now approaching 5 years since DERA was first passed. And so in October of 2024, 3 years after the DERA legislation was passed, only one institution in our network was fully compliant with the DERA law, meaning that they're both utilizing multiple measures placement policy while also utilizing and scaling co-rec remediation. As of May of 2025, and as you can see in this visual, we're now seeing that 2 of our partner institutions are fully compliant in math and 3 are fully compliant in English. And at the same time, 10 institutions are now tracking towards compliance in math and 11 institutions in English. And so, Kathy will talk a little bit more specifically about what compliance under the DERA law means, but we want to be very clear here in saying that we're encouraged by the progress we've seen in the state, particularly amongst our partner colleges. We know that working to compliance with this law takes significant time, resources, and capacity at our institutions who are already stretched very thin as it is. But that being said, there's still far more work that needs to be done. And as a result, we here at PCC, we are actively seeking new funds to continue supporting institutions with their implementation to drive a phase 2 of this technical assistance work. And so if you're interested in the possibility of signing up for this upcoming cohort, we will have a survey at the end of this webinar where you can indicate your interest and our team will follow up with you. So moving to the next slide where we will revisit our timeline. And so again, talking about PCC's role with DERA, Everything that we do at the partnership is driven by data and evidence. And at the same time, we also know that institutions are often stretched thin and may not have the capacity to engage with the most updated data that helps to inform institution level decisions. And for those reasons, the PCC team regularly writes reports that analyzes the latest data about how different policy initiatives are better serving students, again, to support evidence-based decision making. And so, again, we want to make sure that different policy interventions are working for students. And for us, that always has to be driven by the data. And so our upcoming report will reveal findings with some encouraging data on DERA implementation, where we'll report on trends in developmental education in Illinois with a particular focus on the growth and successes we've seen with co-rec remediation in the hope that we can support institutions with data-informed decisions. And so the last slide here, before I turn it over to Giselle to dive deeper into the data, we did want to pull out some key trends to help frame your thinking as we jump into the conversation. And so first, in 5 years from 2018 to 2023, we've seen a huge decline in enrollment in development education coursework, resulting in about 64,000 fewer students placed in DevEd broadly. Secondly, of those students who are being placed in DevEd, we are seeing a larger proportion of those students enrolled in co-requisite remediation, which is with a particularly large increase in math enrollment. And then lastly, we see that the co-requisite models are dramatically more effective than the traditional models, with over 60% of participants passing a gateway course in their first year versus less than 20% who are placed into traditional models. And so though we've only just started to understand the effects on longer term outcomes, ultimately, what we're seeing is that less students are placed in developmental education. Of those students being placed, more are being placed in co-requisite remediation, and the students who are placed in co-requisite are far more likely to obtain more credits, be retained, and then progress towards a degree or a credential. And so with that being said, I'll turn it to Giselle Palacios, who will dig deeper into some of this data. Giselle, I'll turn to you.
Thanks, Sonny. I'm excited to share with you today some key findings from the most recent ICCB and IBHE DERA reports, along with data from the new DERA reports for community colleges that ICCB released this fall. If you're interested in exploring your own college's student outcomes, you can find them directly on ICCB's website. Next slide, please. As Sonny mentioned earlier, developmental education enrollment has been steadily declining. For the class of 2018, 43% of Illinois high school graduates who enrolled at a community college needed at least one developmental education course. By the class of 2023, that number dropped to 28%. On the community college side, we see the same trend. The blue bars on this chart represent the number of students taking at least one developmental education course, while the gray line shows the percentage. Both have clearly declined since 2018, and adjusting for enrollment changes, we estimate that there have been about 64,000 fewer DevEd course enrollments. So that's 64,000 students who had a stronger opportunity to move directly toward their academic goals. While progress has slowed in the last 3 to 4 years in terms of enrollment, we're hopeful that this downward trend will continue. And equally important is the model that these students are being placed into. Next slide, please. You may recall from our first DERA report or previous webinars that we were concerned about a decline in co-rec enrollment compared to other models in 2020 to 21. Fortunately, that trend has reversed. You can see here that between 2021 and 2023, co-rec enrollment grew significantly. Math saw a 75% increase and English grew by 23%. Next slide, please. That said, there's still room for improvement. Ideally, the percentage of students in co-rec models should far exceed those in traditional models. Right now, English is split almost evenly, about 49% in traditional models and 48% in co-rec models. In math, however, 78% of students are still enrolled in the traditional model compared to only 17% in co-rec. Since research consistently shows that students are more successful in co-rec models, we need to scale them further. Our goal should be to place the majority of students in developmental education into co-rec courses to give them the best chance to succeed. And I'll present some evidence to support this in the next slide. Next slide, please. Thanks. The legislation doesn't mandate a specific model, but it emphasizes scaling the one that maximizes student likelihood of completing math and English courses within their first 2 semesters. And the data is clear. That model is co-requisite models. In English, 65% of co-rec students pass a gateway course in their first year, compared to just 20% in the traditional model. In math, 61% of co-rec students pass in their first year compared to only 14% in the traditional model. Compressed models perform slightly better than traditional models, but they still do not come close to co-rec outcomes. This is why placing students in traditional models or other models in their first semester with the hope that they'll succeed in a gateway course in their second semester is not the best approach. Next slide. When we disaggregate the data, the benefits are even more striking. Students of color in co-rec models are 5 to 7 times more likely to pass a math gateway course and 4 times more likely to pass English compared to their peers in traditional models. And in the next slide, you can see that this holds true for students from low-income backgrounds as well. Co-recipients in co-rec models are 4 times more likely to pass a math gateway course and over 3 times more likely to pass an English gateway course than those in traditional models. It's worth noting here that even in strong policy examples, students of color and low-income students don't always benefit to this extent. The fact that co-rec models consistently deliver 4 to 7 times better outcomes underscores the importance of scaling them. Next slide. Co-rec students also outperform their peers in retention, credit accumulation, completion, and graduation rates. More students are retained from fall to fall, and graduation rates, though still early, were already higher for co-rec students in the fall 2021 cohort, which was the first cohort impacted by DERA. We expect these rates to continue improving over time as implementation expands. Next slide. So far, we've focused on community colleges, but let's briefly look at public universities. A positive development is that more universities are offering co-rec models, and some have even eliminated traditional developmental education entirely. Overall, enrollment in developmental education has remained steady at about 3,500 students since 2018-2019, with a small dip during the pandemic. And the share of students in co-rec has grown. In English, 82% of students are now in co-rec, which is exactly the direction we like to see math follow, where currently only 55% are in co-rec and the remaining 45% are in traditional models. Completion rates also highlight the gap. 77.5% of English co-rec students complete a gateway course in their first year compared to just 38% in math, so there's more work to do in scaling math success at our public universities. Next slide. Finally, let's touch on placement. Research from the Inclusive Economy Lab evaluated City Colleges of Chicago's multiple measure placement policy, which allowed students with a GPA of 3.0 or higher to boost into the next level course. Students who had access to the boost took fewer developmental education courses without any negative impact on academic performance or persistence. They also found, however, that some students were more likely to delay taking the required math or English courses, but especially math. And there's a couple of potential reasons for this. One is that students boosted out of Dev Ed no longer need to take a sequence of math or English courses, so they do not feel an urgent need to complete their single required course during their first year. Also, Just Equations research shows that perceived course difficulty and math anxiety are key factors that create unique barriers to math course enrollment and progression. Many students view math as an especially challenging subject and feel intimidated by it, even when they have the skills to succeed. As a result, they're often not eager to begin college by taking what they see as their least favorite class or even a placement exam. Some students actively avoid placement tests altogether because of the high-stakes nature of these exams, trigger fear and anxiety. Unfortunately, that hesitation can prevent them from taking the first step toward completing a gateway course. So while both high school GPA and math or placement exams are valid placement measures, the research suggests that the use of high school GPA as a placement measure should be favored over the use of placement exams whenever possible. Next slide. Before I wrap up, I want to revisit our recommendations and key metrics to monitor as colleges and universities continue their implementation and expand on some of them. First, the state needs to make sure colleges and universities are fully aligned with their placement reforms and continue shifting students away from the traditional courses into co-rec models. Second, colleges have to not just track gateway course completion, but also use that data to prove that any alternative models to co-rec are just as effective or more effective in maximizing student success. And finally, colleges can't overlook placement and advising, reducing reliance on high-stakes placement tests and encouraging students to take the required courses early will be critical to long-term success. In doing so, colleges will not only improve first-year outcomes, but also set students up for stronger retention and graduation rates down the line. So stay tuned for our upcoming DERA report that will be released in the winter of 2026. And please feel welcome to ask any questions about the data in the Q&A, and we will try to answer those questions in the chat or in the discussion section. With that being said, I will now transition to Kathy Almy, who will discuss her experience with supporting DERA implementation.
If we can go to the next slide, we're going to talk about, DERA is a policy. I can't believe it's going to be 5 years next year. That is unreal to me. Marcus, I just saw you like, yeah, we've been working on this for a minute. So for those of you, I know a lot of names, which is great. And for those of you that don't know me, my background, I'm Kathleen Almy. I run Almy Education, and we've been working with PCC for years. I previously was a math professor at Rock Valley College in Illinois for many years. Where we work with women employed. I saw Complete College America is on here. So just lots of great partners that our group works with. Our day in and day out is math and English redesign, and actually now biology and chemistry. So I just want you all to know that this work, if you're wondering, does this work actually transfer and extend? It totally does. And it continues on, and it's very exciting. Brandon Protis and I are actually working with an initiative in Ohio where there's 20 colleges and universities working on co-requisite biology and chemistry, which is just fascinating to see all of this work extend. So I'm going to be talking to you about implementation, some boots on the ground things, what people are doing, because this is what we do day in and day out, is helping schools make this policy actually work on their campus, because there's no one size fits all way to implement co-requisites. And so we're going to dive into looking at different aspects. So next slide, please. I can speak. First off, there's been so much work, and I want to come in. There isn't a college in the state or university who has not worked on DERA in some way. So I want to start with looking and doing some shout outs of some of the great work that's happened in terms of getting specific. So I wanted people that came to this today to come away with, okay, what are some ways that we could actually solve some specific problems that we are facing with our campus? So here are some ideas. Let's go to the next slide. So we're going to start with Prairie State College. These are in no particular order, and they're not alphabetical order. They're just different ones that we have seen that are great. And this doesn't include everybody. There are all kinds of awesome solutions that are happening. But this is a common one that comes up with DERA. There are schools and faculty and staff and administrators that are sometimes worried about, are we going to serve our students with the highest need? Prairie State has specifically, they have worked with their adult basic education group. A lot of schools have pondered down this path, but haven't always found a way to make it happen. And I always point them to the folks at Prairie State because they actively do this. They have found they have a DERA compliant option, but also work with their adult basic ed to serve those students. Next slide. Continuing with Prairie State, another thing that they did, and this sounds tiny, but it's huge. So one of the things they did was they were offering co-requisites on, like, they had a class that was like Monday, Wednesday, and I don't remember if this was English or math. It might have been math, but they were offering the co-requisite on Friday. And there was terrible attendance, the students, I mean, they just did not want to come to class they didn't want to come to campus on a day they weren't already there. So they made a scheduling change. This may not seem like much, but it's these kinds of changes that make co-requisites really work. It isn't just having them, it's the execution of them. So they changed to where their scheduling was the co-requisite time was going to be on existing days that the students were already on campus. Attendance soared, and so did outcomes. And those students that were enrolled in it, they passed the class, which is what we're trying to make happen. So please don't overestimate or underestimate the small things too of how much of a difference they can actually make. Next slide. Let's shift over to another Chicagoland college. So Waubonsie Community College. I love what they do with their bridge program. So these short boot camp type programs. I've worked on boot camps with many, many schools, and there's some definite ways to make boot camps work. there are some highly specific things that make them work more than others. So I'll give you one example. The hardest thing about a boot camp is getting students to sign up for it. Students that sign up for them typically benefit from them, but the problem is most colleges, their boot camps are too long. So one of the things that Waubonsie did is when we worked to develop theirs, they did very short ones, and they've had a lot of success. They did both math and English, and they did a huge campaign to get students there and incentives for students that participated. So, and I believe Dr. Chassie Sheretz is on this webinar. I would absolutely seek out her or Dr. Jessica Moreno at Waubonsie if you want to know more about what they've done. Next slide. Blackhawk College has done a ton with very short, qualified as a lot of times 1 week, but no more than 2. The shorter, the better. So these are not mini courses. They're not 4 and 8 weeks long. They're very, very compressed. They're not replacing a course is the main thing. They're trying to refresh students and give them confidence, but they're not about replacing a course. Blackhawk College has done multiple iterations of their college algebra co-requisites, trying cohorted, commingled, different software, all different kinds of things. And the thing I wanted to mention with this is if your co-requisites aren't working the way you're imagining them yet, a lot of times there is more iteration that is needed. It's not just that we have this time, it's how we spend this time and who's in the room. And Blackhawk College has done a great job of looking at their data and continually tweaking and tweaking. It's not perfect, but they are having more success than they were, and there's a lot less frustration than they had had. So that can be very successful. Next slide. Rock Valley College. This was the college I worked at for years, but I love one of the solutions that they came up with. So co-requisites logistically can be a big challenge in terms of getting students to be able to sign up for both the co-req section, if it is a separate course, and the college level section. So what some schools do, and Rock Valley didn't start this, many schools have done this. I believe also Lakeland College has done this, as well as some others. But what they did was they basically created plus courses or extended courses where it's still like a college algebra, but it meets for more contact hours and has the co-requisite support built into it, meaning the students only sign up for 1 class. They don't have to try to sign up for 2 classes. It dramatically simplifies registration. It also makes your tracking much easier. You can clearly see who are the students in co-requisites, who are the students not, and you can track outcomes. That's a big thing that a lot of schools face when they're trying to do this work, is they're not always able to study it the way they want, because how we design the implementation will directly impact how easy or difficult it is to see how much it's working. Next slide. Let's see, Illinois Central. Okay, we had some questions that were entered when people registered about pedagogy. Is anyone doing anything amazing with pedagogy? I always point to Illinois Central. So PMGE, Preparatory Math for General Education, was a course that I and several math faculty worked on starting in 2009 is when I started working on it nationally. Illinois, we rolled it out in 2013. And it was a different way of doing developmental with active learning, lots of applications. And we had what's called a pathways model. And it was meant for students who were headed towards non-STEM courses like statistics, to give them a better preparation than just lots of high school algebra all over again. And we always said, those of us that were working on it, man, we need this for STEM. We need this, a course just like this for the students going to college algebra. Well, Illinois Central took some National Science Foundation materials that are open access called Thinking with Algebra. If anybody is interested, email me. I will send you a link. We have access to all of this stuff and you can learn more about it. But Illinois Central has rolled out a course that has this very active learning, growth mindset, active pedagogy that is at the developmental level for students for whom a college algebra co-requisite would be too much. And it's a different way of doing beginning or intermediate algebra. Again, did it solve all their problems? No. Does it solve some of them? Yes. And it is a way better course than beginning or intermediate algebra is. We're not trying to do so much. We're trying to do less, but better. And they really have changed pedagogy. Next slide. And Kaskaskia College. This is one I want people to know about, because a lot of times schools are like, well, we have to keep our developmental because we have certificate programs that use our developmental courses before that they, as preparation before they go into certain technical math courses. And what I want you to know is co-requisite is an amazing intervention and it works in lots of places, including technical math. So you do not have to keep pre-algebra on your schedule just to make sure your students are prepared for technical math or like math for nursing or math for welding. You can incorporate a co-requisite with math skills into it and directly support those students and get them through in one semester. And Kaskaskia has been doing that, I think, for 4 years. So, and then having quite a bit of success. All right, next slide. So this is great. Lots of great work is happening. There's been no shortage of activity. However, it was what you saw with Giselle, what she showed. We still have a lot of students, especially in math, that are in standalone developmental courses, also totally exists in English as well. And there's a reason for it. And I'm going to show you that. And one of the reasons is how placement is being done. Everybody in the state uses multiple measures placement. However, how we're doing that, most schools can go further, meaning a lot of people are like, yes, if a student has a 3.0, we allow them to go into what the law states as the courses they can start in. They have a 3.0 high school GPA. What if they have a 2.5? Most schools funnel a student straight to a placement test at that point. That is where we could be using multiple measures and not give them a placement test. So that's one of the things when we're working with schools, myself and my coaches, we are really trying to get schools to look at their data first off. We do validity studies. Dr. Joanne Cantner is on this call. She helps us with many schools where we look at what are their placement approaches that are working the best. And 9 times out of 10, GPA is the most predictive. And so there's a reason why research keeps saying it works, because it really does. But we like to look at schools' own data so they can see for themselves what's working. So let's look, how can we go a little bit further and actually scale the intention of DERA? So let's go to the next slide. And I first want to teach you a visual that I'm going to use. Some of you have seen this, some of you haven't. Please don't be overwhelmed by it. Ignore all the numbers. Please, all I want you to look at is the colors and how dark the colors are. So what this is we call this a course heat map. And at Almy Education, we've been using these now for a while. It's something we developed. And what it allows us to see is the sequence. And we do this for math, English, and now we're doing it for the science courses. We want to see how students are moving through a program, not just a single course. So what we do is we take a semester, typically a fall semester, and we map out how many students took a particular course and how many students passed it to get a sense of what is the flow. So what I want you to see in this picture is this is highly representative of most Illinois colleges still and many colleges around the US. The red means the pass rate is less than 50%. Orange is the pass rate is between 50 and 60%. Then we have yellow, and then it's a green light, red light situation. We want green boxes. Green means the pass rate of the course is 70% or higher, okay? The darker the box is, this is actually a density heat map. So if the box is a dark green, that means there's a lot of students in it passing. And if it's a light green, it means they're passing, but there's not that many students comparatively. So what I want you to see in this picture is what we see all the time. The vast majority of students in this picture are starting in beginning algebra, the very lowest level, and they are not passing it. And if you want to look at the key, the pass rate is underneath the box, and it's underneath the red box, and it is 42%. We're not calling any school out, but I'm saying this came from real data. Okay, this was not made up. So this is what we have still most of the way. Many schools have co-requisites. However, that's not where students are starting. Most students are still taking a placement test and starting in developmental, standalone developmental, and they're taking multiple semesters. And if they get through it, then they get into a college level course. That's the piece that DERA wants us to change and that we need to change regardless, because I talk to faculty every single day, and I was faculty, I get it. If you're like, I think we're in compliance, I don't understand what the big deal is. Forget about compliance for a second and think about, are we serving students? This approach does not help students pass. And so for the math folks that are out there, we're going to do a little math real quick. If anybody else just wants to be like, ooh, let's do some math, here we go. So one of the things you can do is you can estimate throughput with these graphs that we do, meaning what's the chance if you start at a certain place, you make it all the way through. So if you look at a student starting in the red box, the beginning algebra, the chance of them passing is 42%. So 42%, then let's assume all of them that pass sign up and take intermediate algebra, which they don't. Many of them will pass and then sit out a semester. Let's imagine they all do. the chance of them passing in this situation is only 49%. Then if they take that and pass, and then they go into liberal arts math, so the math 110, their chance of passing that, if I can, my old eyes, I believe is 78%. With probabilities, if we want to know what the chance of passing this and this and this, if the situations are independent, we multiply probabilities. So I multiply on my calculator, and there is a 16% chance that if a student starts in 050 in this picture, passes and immediately takes all their courses, will pass the 110. What we have found, because of other states who have done this before us, what we found is, what if we just started them in 110? Forget about beginning intermediate algebra. Let's just give them a really good co-requisite and start them in 110. Many schools and states can get well over 70 into 80% of students passing that course on the first attempt. And they did, because algebra wasn't the key thing in determining whether or not they needed it. But we still fundamentally, I didn't believe that was true until I saw it, but a lot of people do not believe that that can actually happen, or they think we're going to be dumbing things down to make it happen. Neither are the case. Let's go to the next slide. So let's remember what DERA is about, okay? So again, the idea of the law is we are supposed to maximize the probability that a student will successfully complete, so we're talking C or better, college level English or college level math within 2 semesters of starting at the institution, not like 2 ever semesters, but within 2 semesters of starting. Okay, so now let's go to the next heat map. And what we're going to do is we're going to start looking at, what do we commonly see? What does compliance or non-compliance look like? So let's go to the next one. All right, so what I was showing you before, this is not DERA compliant. The example that I gave you, it is highly unlikely a student will complete a college level course within 2 semesters. When I see a school in this situation, the very first thing I ask them is, can we start playing with your placement? Can we start more students in your college level courses or college level with co-requisite? And the other thing we talk about, the other thing I want you to see in this is, there are way too many students that are still headed towards the STEM path. The vast majority of students at 2-year colleges are there to get an Associates of Arts, meaning they don't need to take college algebra. But the advising and the just predetermined notions, we all kind of have biases. It's like, well, if we take the algebra, we give students the most opportunities. The data has borne that out time and time again. That is not true. And it's a really good way to get students to leave college altogether, especially with math. If they have a bad experience with math, they don't always just drop. Sometimes they just leave college. So we need to be thoughtful about what math course they start in and what they really need to be successful, because their perception of themselves matters. Okay, let's go to the next slide. This is where we try to get, if I can go further with a school, we'll go further. But at minimum, we try to get schools to what I would call minimally DERA compliant, which is you have 1 max semester of developmental before college level. Now, is this ideal? No. And it's because if you would have to look at your data and you can see this, it is possible a student will complete in 2 semesters. It is not necessarily probable, okay? Because there's still too many students that are going to start in a developmental course and not get out of it. The pass rates are very low on a standard developmental algebra course. It's boring. It feels like high school at twice the speed and twice the boringness. And students don't stay in those courses and they don't do well in them. We know this. So that is this. If you're here, I'm happy that you've made the progress to this because you're on your way, but we need to fine tune. And the fine tuning is we need to adjust the placement and get a whole lot more students starting in those green and those yellow boxes and fewer. And this picture doesn't actually have a college algebra co-req. This school, I would say, let's get a co-req. Let's get a co-requisite for college algebra. Let's get more students starting in 110 and 120. And let's not have so many start in beginning or intermediate algebra. So it's possible, but not probable. Let's look at the next slide. So this is what I would call fully, but also not just fully compliant. It's not about compliance. I mean, yes, we care about that. It's about success. If students are this route, yeah, you're going to definitely check the box on fully DERA compliant, but you're also going to have a whole lot of students getting through math and English. And that's the point. And they won't have had a horrible experience either. That's what we want. We want them to have a good experience, that this builds momentum, because we know that as students get through, especially math, their first year, it's a momentum metric. that it will help them bolster them to stay in and complete. So in this situation, it is highly likely that a student would complete a college level course in 2 semesters. The vast majority of them are starting in either the course or the course with co-req. There is one developmental course, and this course that I put on here, this Math 070, Thinking with Algebra, that's like that course that Illinois Central uses. That's what I'm thinking, like has great pedagogy, great active learning. It's not just our traditional algebra all over again. So it's a really well-designed course. 1 semester, only certain students take it. The students that we know are headed towards STEM and for whom a college algebra co-requisite is too much. It's going to be a really small number of students. That's why the green is so light. We should not have 80% of our students sitting in developmental and 20% sitting in gateway courses. It should be flipped of that. Very few students need an additional semester, if any. And we're finding more and more, many times they don't need any semester of developmental, that they would be helped. But if you're like, hey, Kathy, I've been teaching co-requisites for years, you're full of it. The key is you've got to have a good co-requisite. And that's usually where we have to do work with schools as well. What are you doing with that time during the week? If you're just trying to teach intermediate algebra, a full intermediate algebra course at the same time as teaching a statistics class, that is not an example of a good co-requisite. And it's not going to get you the results you want. If you redesign the co-req time, you can have an amazing outcome in your statistics class, as an example. All right, let's go to the next slide. So what I want you to take away from this is what the main thing that most schools that we're seeing in Illinois, what they need to do is go further, which means you need to delete, not just add. A lot of people have added things, but they haven't deleted. I always say scale happens in the schedule, not the flow chart. So it's not in theory, the flow chart's in theory what we offer. The schedule is what you actually offer. So when anybody asks me, they're like, oh, is our school in compliance? All I have to do is go look at your class schedule. And I can tell you, and if I see 30 sections of basic math being offered, there's no way on God's green earth that your students are gonna likely get through in 2 semesters of math. Same way if you have 30 sections of developmental reading, they're not going to get through in 2 semesters. And if you're thinking, well, if they do get through in 2, you dumb things down. Those 2, it's not that those are your only options. You can do this legitimately and we can make this happen, but we have to make some more adjustments. Next slide, please. So this is also true for English, but particularly in math, one of the biggest things that we need to be doing is we have to get students started in the right course and the right pathway. It's not just enough that they're starting in a course with a co-requisite. Too many of them are sitting in college algebra right now, and they shouldn't be. They should be sitting in statistics or liberal arts math.
I'm in the meeting, sorry.
Oh, and one thing I wanted to mention for anybody who's worried about like, is that a good thing to have them in terms of the curriculum? Keep this in mind as someone who's taught this stuff for almost 30 years. College algebra is a very demotivating course and not particularly useful. Our non-STEM courses are actually incredibly useful to their real lives and they're more interesting. So it's a win-win on a whole bunch of things. We're going to probably get them through the course and they're probably going to learn something like mortgages that's going to help them in their life. So there's a reason we want to make these changes. All right, let's go to the next slide. And I'm PCC, I'm on time. We're going to wrap this up and we'll turn it back to you for Q&A in just a second. But what I want to mention is for those that are new to us, we have a framework at Almy Education that is based on research and the over 100 schools that we have done redesigns with from all levels. And these are the things that we focus on with the schools. How they work together, that's culture. All the systemic level things like what courses are they offering, how their placement works, advising, registration, and then we work on classroom. So that's a big thing is if you're like, well, we already have co-requisites and we already have multiple measures placement, maybe you need more help with the classroom level, that we need to adjust some things with pedagogy, pace, how we're addressing certain things, active learning. There are lots of places and levers that we can pull that can get you higher satisfaction from faculty and students and more students through legitimately. If we go to the next slide. So if anybody, if you want to follow up with me, I just want to provide my email address and I'll put it in the chat. It looks like we've got a bunch of questions. So I'm gonna turn it over to Mike and we'll go from there.
Awesome. Thanks so much, Kathy. And thank you, Giselle, also for providing that great insight. And so We're going to go ahead and pivot to the next 9 minutes or so for our Q&A section. So we know that we have a lot of people, of folks in this room. We have folks here who have been doing this work with us for a long time, and folks who this might be your first time engaging with this issue. And so because of that, we want to provide multiple ways for you to submit questions. And so we'll start by answering questions you submitted prior to the webinar, but also please feel free to keep submitting questions in the chat. Use the Zoom raise your hand function if you'd like to come off mute, or you can also ask questions in our post-webinar survey. And so with that being said, we'll move forward and invite Mike Abrahamson, Director of Policy at PCC, and then Kathy Almy back to join us in this discussion. And so to get us going for our first question today, Mike, it's been 5 years since the DERA legislation has been passed. To start this conversation, do we anticipate any upcoming changes to the DERA law?
Yeah, I mean, I'll say that this is not one of PCC's priorities for this upcoming legislative session. I'm sure there's people on both sides of this. We hear from people that it would be great to have further clarification in law. I'm sure there's also some wariness around it, any legislation. Regardless, that's not one of our top priorities. Of course, there are hundreds of higher education bills that come up that are not necessarily our priorities. So we'll definitely be talking with legislators as they're interested about this stuff. What I will say is right now our focus is on working with institutions in the kind of way that we're doing right now, and also agencies working together to try to provide as much clarity as we can and work forward together since we all have the same goals. That said, if you have any thoughts on either opportunities or concerns with this legislation, you can reach out to us. You can reach out to me. Now is a great time to talk about it because this is not one of our, imminent legislative priorities. I think it would be great to hear from you, any thoughts that you have so that we can incorporate those into our work.
Awesome. Thanks so much, Mike. So we'll move into our next question. And so Kathy, I think this is more for you. Obviously our focus of this conversation has been on co-requisite remediation specifically, but this question is, what are some recent new innovative pedagogical approaches besides co-requisites to teach developmental education?
Okay, so I love this question because I'm very much on we need to make structural changes. Anybody that works for me knows I harp on this all the time, that's where we get the most bang for our buck in terms of student outcomes. But we cannot leave the classroom the way we've been doing it forever. We do need to be making changes in how we do pedagogy, especially post-pandemic and with the advent of AI. My goodness, the wonderful work that we have students that submit through ChatGPT is just absolutely fantastic. That's sarcasm. So one of the things I want to mention is that there has been a ton of work done at the national level on things that were like, it was called math literacy. We call it PMGE in Illinois. It's called Statway, Quantway, Dana Center Math Pathways. The reason I'm mentioning all of this is the big thing that came out of, and there's lots of research that came out of that, is if we pull back on the amount of content, we focus on the things that are most important, get more active learning, more applications in, and have more relevance, including technology, students will engage, they will do better in the course, and they will do better in the subsequent courses. So we know what are actual pedagogical things that we need to do differently. But unfortunately, the traditional beginning and intermediate algebra in most places are still taught the way we were teaching it in the 70s. So it's like that, we do need to take, and here's what's really nice. If you're a math faculty member and you're like, I don't have time to create new materials, you don't have to. There's so much stuff out there, including things that are free. And if you want to know more about this, reach out to me. But you don't have to pay anything. There's lots of open education resources that will allow you to have the active learning experience that you want in your class.
Awesome. Thanks so much, Kathy. Super helpful. So this next question, I'll direct to both of you, but maybe I'll start with Mike and then Kathy, you can close us out. But it's about the money, right? We have to make money work for co-requisite to be implemented. And so this question is about, do we anticipate funding for upscaling models that bring in less tuition but are more effective? Could PCC and Almy Education possibly help colleges with assessing ROI? Mike, I'll give this one to you.
Yeah, and I'll actually start with the second part, and then I'll kick it to Kathy to talk more about partnerships and resources. So I do think that assessing ROI with partners, I think that kind of partnership and data analysis is something that we at PCC have always relished in. I think, we've been working with our institutional partners for 10 years. We've been building out our team and actually are further building out our team to that end. So we would love to work with institutions on exactly that kind of thing. And I believe there are some funding and partnership opportunities that have just popped up. Kathy, if you want to talk a little bit about that too.
Yes, I mean, Marcus, I just saw
Oh, yeah.
that Dina Shank had sent out and so I'll let you talk about that in a second if you want, but there are the ICCB has new grant opportunities for schools that are looking for DERA support. So the thing that I wanted to say is we've worked with we might have worked with 30 colleges at this point in Illinois, colleges and universities, and where they get funding. So if you join, like if PCC has another cohort of work at some point, if Women Employed has another cohort, I had schools that thought you had to pay to be in those cohorts. You don't. Thankfully, these groups have been able to get outside funding from philanthropy to allow us to have these cohort projects and provide schools with technical assistance. So we're hoping that more of that will come through. But also the state has been, and I'm not just saying this because Marcus is here and I like him, the state has been incredibly supportive year after year after year, providing grants. Like, give them an idea. This is how we want to implement DERA. We need some funds to do it. If you have a good reason, they're really good about putting funds. And so one of the things I wanted to mention is we've worked with many of those schools that have done that. So I'll let Marcus talk more about that, but there's definitely ways to get help.
Absolutely. Thank you both so much. And Marcus, we're looking forward to hearing from you in a couple of minutes. So we've got about 2 minutes left for this section. And again, we'll answer any other questions you might have in a follow-up or a follow-up document after the webinar. But we'll maybe close with this question. And maybe I'll do Kathy first and then Mike on this question. But this question is, if a student has extremely low scores, lower than our multiple measures minimums, do you suggest using a DevEd course to prepare them for the co-req model? And if so, is this done before enrollment in Gen Ed courses? And so Kathy, maybe I'll give this to you to start.
Okay, so I think what is so interesting is, especially coming from the lens of being an educator, we really believed that was the answer for the longest time. And the thing to remember is we have to look at behavior, not just mathematical or English behavior, but how students act. And this is where I always try to remind people, we're on the clock with students. So they could have an amazing one semester of DevEd. It does not mean they will sign up for the next course or pass it. What we have found, it would be better to have an amazing semester in like a non-STEM class or an English 101 class and have a really good co-requisite that supports them. The vast majority, I'm talking well over 75% students, can be supported that way. And then others, we can do other things like embedded tutoring, high touch tutoring, your TRIO programs, if those still exist, but the other things that you have at your school, as well as boot camps and bridge programs. What I'm trying to get at is, as someone who taught DevEd for 20 years, it's not standalone DevEd is something, it's kind of like my last resort. The data just does not support that it as alone does what we want. However, the things that we know about it, the type of education, those ideas still matter. We just need to be using them in other places.
Yeah, I don't have too much to add. I think that's really well said. I'll say a lot of my interaction with this stuff is around compliance, right? Like the original law and how to comply. I think that the original law, for all of the clarifications that we hear about, it talks about maximizing the probability of student success. And I really think that the path to success, both in terms of very technical compliance with this law, but also for students, is really getting in the weeds of that data and owning the issues and saying, okay, this might not work as well for this student population as the data shows us works for this student population. I will say I'm super encouraged by the chat, by all of the Jonathans and others in the chat that are getting really into the weeds of, for this group of students, we've been doing this, or how does this relate to the funding formula? I think that all of those are really all webinars in and of themselves and questions that we would love to be working with and talking more with you all to expand on. Because I think there's like a deep well of both questions and knowledge that we can be sharing.
Absolutely. Thank you both. And Kathy and Mike, I think that's a great place for us to end right here at the partnership. One, Data has to drive all of our decisions, right? And how we support institutions moving forward. And two, right, we want to build on all the institutional knowledge we've built over the last 5 years as we think about this next phase of this work. And so thank you both so much for all your insights. And once again, right, we will answer any other questions that went unanswered after the webinar. So thank you very much. So that being said, that brings us to the end of what was a very fast hour. And so to close us out, I want to introduce Marcus Brown, who's the Deputy Director for Academic Affairs and Student Success at the Illinois Community College Board, to provide some closing remarks. And so Marcus, welcome.
All right, thank you, and good morning, everyone. And I will try to get through comments as quickly as I can. I do want to thank PCC for all of its partnership we've had over the years and working very well with them. And what we know has become really good outcomes for institutions working to improve DevEd outcomes across the state. So again, thank you to PCC and to Kathy, who we've worked very closely with over the years. I wanted I'll just put in the chat really quickly that we do have the grant that's now available for the next round for DevEd. So if you're looking for some of those funding opportunities, we do have some where you can take a quick look at those grants, that grant that's coming up and due, I think, mid-December or so. I also want to mention that we've had several regional convenings to talk about DevEd and kind of what folks have been doing. We have one more still slated for late winter up north, as well as our DevEd conference that we will again repeat in the spring of 2026. We had what we called our first sort of DevEd statewide convening this past year to great success, and folks have asked, "Are you doing it again? Are you doing it again?" And the answer is yes, we are. And so we will. It's tagged at the end of that. And so we will again have the spring a conference in the spring related to DevEd. I do want to touch on a couple things really quickly. One is that again, over the next year, we'll also be reviewing placement standard recommendations and other evidence-based practices. That's been one of our charges as part of the DERA legislation. So again, many of you know we've had changes in the ACT, including it becoming the state exam again. And so there, as a result of that, there's also been some changes in how ACT reports scores. And so thinking through what that looks like, we had already convened a study with the College Board to look at the efficacy of the placement scores with SAT and what that looked like in our student database. And of course, again, continuing to measure the efficacy of transitional instruction. So all of that work continues to be underway over the next year, and hopefully we'll have some outcomes to report back sort of toward the end of the fiscal year. The other thing I think I want to flag too is that we continue to look at outcomes of DevEd reports. And so many of you always think about what does it mean, when we have to do those DevEd reports, and is it just an exercise in what we're doing? And it's not. So one of the things we use that for is to understand the implications of the models used for DevEd. So we've talked very specifically about co-rec here, but we talk about 6 sort of primary models for DevEd reform that might be used, plus a couple of other hybrid models. And so we have an opportunity to look at a statewide picture about, how well are those models producing results? We're looking at the number of folks in them, how well they are producing results. And so we do use it for that. We also have recently released our data dashboard. And so we have an opportunity for folks to look at really what those outcomes are based on a number of demographics that folks are using, a number of tracking mechanisms. So looking at, outcomes on data, the data dashboard, so that you have an opportunity to understand a little bit more about what those data looks like without having 500, 600 cell Excel spreadsheets that we formally passed out as well. And then finally, I saw a number of comments in the chat about kind of how co-requisite is structured, and I'm happy to talk more about that at some other time, but just want to flag that we have had numbers of conversations based on how we've seen those reports about whether or not that course, the co-rec is a DevEd course, whether it's a college level course or 1.1, as many folks refer to, or just expanding credit. And there are lots of ways to do that model, and any of those could be valid ways. And so I'm happy to talk to you or Dr. Trish Broughton at ICCB as well about how you can structure those courses to make the most sense of what you're doing at your particular institution and content. So again, I want to thank PCC for their partnership and trying to go really, really quickly in comments, and look forward to engaging with you much more.